You are too small to be dangerous. The alien warlord laughed, and the entire arena laughed with him. But the tiny human standing alone beneath the cold blue lights of the Karuan battle chamber did not laugh back. Caleb Morgan simply looked up at the towering figure above him and said, "That is what everyone says right before they learn something new." For a moment, the galaxy watching through thousands of broadcast screens went silent. The Karuan believed size was proof of worth. They believed strength could be measured by height, armor, and the number of worlds conquered. And Varkal the Iron Maw had spent his entire life proving them right. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, covered in ancient black armor that had survived battles across the outer systems. The Karuan warriors around him carried themselves like living legends, and their leader was the greatest of them all. He had defeated champions from species that were stronger, faster, and older than humanity. To him, humans were not warriors. They were workers, builders, negotiators, a young species that had somehow wandered into a dangerous galaxy and mistaken survival for strength. Varkal looked down at Caleb with amusement. "You are the representative of Earth?" he asked through the translator built into his helmet. "This is disappointing. I expected a soldier." Caleb glanced around the arena. He saw thousands of alien faces watching him. Some were curious. Some were afraid. Most were waiting to see how quickly the human would fail. He had seen that look before. Not from aliens. From people who judged others before they understood them. Caleb had spent years in places where survival depended on patience, discipline, and knowing when not to move. The hardest lessons were never about fighting. They were about control. "I am exactly what Earth sent," Caleb replied. Varkal tilted his head. A small human with no advanced armor. No energy shield. No ceremonial weapon. "You expect me to believe your species belongs among the great powers?" Caleb looked at the massive armor covering the warlord from head to toe. It was impressive, beautiful even, a masterpiece of alien engineering. But Caleb noticed something else. The way the plates connected. The way the joints moved. The small delays between each motion. Details most people would ignore. Details humans were trained to notice. "You spent a lot of time making that armor," Caleb said quietly. The crowd murmured. Varkal smiled. "It has protected me for over 50 years. Then you trust it?" "Of course." Caleb nodded slowly. "That might be your problem." The laughter returned, louder this time. Varkal raised his hand, and the arena became quiet again. He wanted the moment. He wanted everyone watching to remember the day a human was humbled. But Caleb was not thinking about pride. He was thinking about the people back home who believed in him. The civilians he had protected. The team members who taught him that courage was not about being fearless. It was about standing there when everyone else expected you to run. Varkal stepped forward. "Last chance, human. Admit you are outmatched." Caleb took a slow breath. He remembered an old saying from his commander. Never underestimate someone because they look harmless. The universe is full of things that survive because others fail to notice them. Caleb looked at the alien warlord and answered with a calm voice. "I never said I was stronger than you." The crowd leaned closer. "I only said you were wrong about me." And for the first time that day, Varkal stopped smiling. The arena was built to make opponents feel small. The ceiling stretched nearly 200 feet above the ground. The walls were covered with the symbols of conquered worlds, and every seat was filled with warriors who had spent their lives believing strength belonged only to the biggest and the strongest. But Caleb Morgan had learned something different a long time ago. Size was easy to measure. Character was not. As the crowd watched, Varkal stepped closer, each heavy movement making the metal floor beneath him shake. His ancient armor reflected the blue lights above, showing every scar from battles that had made him a legend. The Karuan warlord looked at Caleb like he was looking at an interesting animal, not an opponent. "You still stand there," Varkal said. "Why?" Caleb kept his eyes on him. "Because you asked me to." A few aliens in the crowd exchanged confused looks. They expected fear. They expected anger. They expected a human desperate to prove himself. What they saw instead was someone calm enough to wait. Varkal had fought hundreds of opponents, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Fear was predictable. Confidence was not. "You believe your words will protect you?" the warlord asked. Caleb shook his head. "No. Words are just words." "Then what protects you?" Caleb looked around the arena. For a brief second, he thought about the people who had watched him leave Earth. The engineers who repaired ships in orbit. The families living on distant colonies. The ordinary people who never wanted war but understood that peace only lasted when someone was willing to defend it. He thought about his old team. The ones who taught him that the strongest person in the room was usually the one who did not need everyone else to know it. Preparation, Caleb answered. The crowd laughed again. Varkle smiled. Preparation? Against me? He lifted his arm, and the arena screens displayed records of his victories. Dozens of battles, dozens of opponents, entire armies that had surrendered after seeing him walk onto the battlefield. The message was clear. The Karuan did not need to threaten anyone. Their reputation did the work for them. Look carefully, human, Varkle said. This is what power looks like. Caleb studied the armor again. He noticed the small movements between the plates, the slight adjustment whenever Varkle turned his shoulders, the way the suit compensated for his weight, the way the technology protected him, but also controlled him. Every machine had rules. Every system had limits. That was something humans understood better than anyone. You are very proud of that armor, Caleb said. The warlord's expression changed slightly. It is a symbol of my victories. No, Caleb replied. It is a reminder that you expect something else to protect you. The arena became quiet. Varkle's smile disappeared. For the first time, the crowd was not laughing at Caleb. They were watching him. The warlord raised his hand, and the gates behind him opened. A group of Karuan warriors stepped forward, carrying equipment used for ceremonial challenges. The announcer's voice echoed through the chamber, declaring the next phase of the trial. Varkle wanted the galaxy to see the human fail under pressure. He wanted everyone to remember that humanity had no place among warriors. Caleb lowered his shoulders and took one slow breath. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. This was no longer a conversation. The warlord moved first, and every screen in the galaxy focused on the smallest fighter in the arena. The arena went completely silent the moment Varkle moved. For thousands of years, the Karuan had taught their children that hesitation was weakness. Their warriors were trained to strike first, overwhelm quickly, and never allow an opponent time to think. But Caleb Morgan did not react the way they expected. He did not rush forward. He did not try to match the warlord's size. He simply watched. The first movement told him more than 100 words could. Varkle was powerful, but he was also predictable. The massive armor that made him look unstoppable forced every movement into a pattern. Every step had weight. Every turn required adjustment. Every action announced itself before it happened. Caleb had spent years learning how to notice things other people ignored. A small change in someone's posture. A pause before a decision. A mistake hidden behind confidence. Varkle stopped a few feet away and looked almost disappointed. That is your strategy? The warlord asked. Standing there, Caleb kept his eyes on the armor. I am trying to understand what I am looking at. The crowd reacted instantly. Some aliens laughed. Others whispered. To them, Caleb was making excuses. Varkle slowly raised his hand, showing the difference between them. One was a legendary warrior covered in advanced technology. The other was a human wearing simple combat clothing with no visible protection. You are studying me? Varkle said. You should be trying to survive. Caleb finally looked directly at him. Those are not always the same thing. The words were quiet, but they reached every corner of the arena. Varkle's expression hardened. He was used to opponents begging, shouting, or trying to impress him. He was not used to someone treating him like a problem that needed solving. You think you can analyze me? Varkle asked. You think your small human mind can understand Karuan warfare? Caleb shook his head. Not yet. That answer caught the warlord off guard. Not because it was threatening, because it was honest. Caleb was not pretending to know everything. He was gathering information. That was what made humans dangerous. They did not need to understand something immediately. They learned. They adapted. They survived. Around the arena, the Karuan warriors began watching more carefully. The laughter had faded. Even they could feel something changing. Varkle noticed it too. His own soldiers were no longer looking at Caleb like a joke. They were watching him like an unknown variable. The warlord stepped back and activated the combat systems built into his armor. The ancient plates shifted with a deep mechanical sound. The symbols of his victories illuminated across his chest. This armor has defeated champions from 12 civilizations, Varkle said. It has survived weapons that destroyed entire armies. Caleb nodded slowly. I believe you. For a moment, Varkle seemed confused. He expected disbelief. He expected an argument. Then why are you not afraid? Caleb looked at the armor one more time. Because everything that protects you also tells me how you fight. The arena lights reflected across Varkal's helmet. Nobody spoke. The warlord had spent decades making others fear what he wore. Now, for the first time, someone was looking past it. Varkal lowered his stance. The challenge was no longer entertainment. It had become personal. Very well, human, he said. Let us see if your confidence survives reality. Caleb tightened his hands and took one final breath. Not because he was afraid, because he was preparing. The first exchange was about to begin, and the entire galaxy was about to discover that the smallest person in the arena had been paying attention the entire time. The first thing Caleb noticed was not the speed. It was the confidence. Varkal moved like someone who had never questioned whether he would win. The arena floor shook beneath the warlord's heavy steps as the ancient armor adjusted around his body, each piece locking into place with a deep mechanical sound. The crowd erupted. They had seen this moment many times before. The powerful warrior advancing. The smaller opponent realizing too late that courage was not enough. But Caleb Morgan did not look surprised. He watched the armor. He watched the movement. He watched the person inside it. Varkal rushed forward with incredible force, expecting Caleb to panic. Instead, the human moved at the last possible second. Not wildly. Not desperately. Just enough. The warlord passed by, confused by the simple movement. A wave of silence spread through the arena. You avoided me, Varkal said. Yes, Caleb answered. Why? The human looked at him calmly. Because I did not need to stand where you were going to be. The Karuan warriors watching from the stands exchanged uncertain looks. They understood strength. They understood aggression. They understood overwhelming an opponent. But they did not understand patience. Varkal turned slowly. For the first time, the amusement in his voice disappeared. You think this is a game of strategy? Everything is strategy, Caleb replied. Even choosing when not to act. The warlord raised his arm, and the armor responded instantly. Energy systems activated across the surface, displaying the technology that had made him famous. The crowd cheered again, believing the human was finally going to understand the difference between them. Caleb saw something different. The armor was not just protection. It was a system with habits, a system with limits. He noticed the small delay when the left shoulder moved. He noticed how the chest plating shifted before the legs changed direction. He noticed that Varkal trusted the armor so completely that he had stopped paying attention to himself. That was the mistake. You keep looking at my armor, Varkal said. Because it tells me a story, Caleb answered. A story. The warlord laughed quietly. And what does it say? Caleb paused. He thought about the answer. He did not want to insult him. He did not want to win through arrogance. That was never who he was. It says you built something powerful, Caleb said. But it also says you forgot how to fight without it. The arena became completely still. The words landed harder than any attack could have. Varkal stared at the human in front of him, trying to understand why this small opponent was not acting like someone who wanted approval. Caleb was not trying to become a legend. He was trying to finish a mission. The warlord moved again, faster this time. The crowd leaned forward. Caleb stepped back, turned, and used the momentum instead of fighting against it. The massive warrior stopped himself before reaching the edge of the arena. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on Varkal's face. Not fear. Not defeat. Something more uncomfortable. Doubt. What are you? The warlord asked quietly. Caleb looked at him. Human. The answer was simple. But nobody in the arena laughed anymore. Because they were starting to realize the most important thing about Caleb Morgan. He was not trying to prove that humans were stronger. He was showing them that they had never understood what strength really was. For the first time in decades, Varkal the Iron Maw was not being cheered. He was being watched. The difference was small, but every warrior in the arena felt it. The Karuan people knew victory. They knew dominance. They knew what it looked like when a stronger opponent forced a weaker one to surrender. But they did not know what to do when the weaker opponent refused to behave like one. Caleb Morgan stood across from the warlord, breathing steadily. His clothing was damaged from the challenge, but his expression had not changed. He looked less like someone trapped in a battle and more like someone trying to solve a difficult problem. Varkal noticed. That bothered him. You are studying me, the warlord said. Caleb nodded. Yes. And you believe observation will save you. Caleb looked at the massive armor covering Varkal's body. No. Understanding will. The answer created another wave of silence. The Karuan expected pride. They expected fear. They expected a human desperate to survive. They did not expect honesty. Varkol slowly walked around Caleb, the heavy armor adjusting with every movement. You are strange, human. Most creatures facing me either challenge my strength or admit defeat. Caleb watched the movement of the armor plates. Most creatures make decisions before they have enough information. The warlord stopped. Are you saying I am wrong? I am saying you are comfortable. Those words reached deeper than Caleb intended. Varkol had spent his entire life being the strongest person in every room. Comfort had never seemed like a weakness to him. It had been proof that he had earned his position. But Caleb saw something different. He saw a warrior who had never needed to change. The arena lights shifted as the combat system prepared the next phase of the challenge. The ancient Karuan symbols across the walls began glowing, and thousands of spectators leaned forward. The announcer declared that the next stage would test endurance, adaptation, and tactical ability. Varkol smiled again. Finally, something worthy. Caleb did not answer. Instead, he looked toward the control panels around the arena. Then he looked back at the warlord. Your armor controls more than protection, does it not? Varkol's expression tightened slightly. It was only for a second, but Caleb noticed. Explain yourself. The armor helps with balance, movement, and power distribution. It makes you faster than your size should allow. Varkol said nothing. Caleb continued. But every system has a cost. The more it helps you, the more you depend on it. The crowd became restless. Some aliens thought Caleb was making a desperate argument. Others had started listening carefully. A young Karuan officer near the arena entrance quietly said, "He is not insulting the armor. He is analyzing it." Varkol heard him. That made his expression grow colder. He had faced enemies who hated him. He had faced enemies who feared him. But this human was doing something completely different. He was learning. The warlord stepped forward and activated the full combat settings of his armor. The ancient machine responded with a deep mechanical hum that echoed throughout the arena. Then learn this, Varkol said. The Karuan do not lose. Caleb lowered his stance. Everyone says that before the first time. The crowd held its breath. Varkol moved forward with complete confidence, certain that the next moment would finally prove what everyone believed. But Caleb was already watching the armor, watching the movement, watching the tiny delay between the warrior and the machine. And for the first time, the legendary warlord realized something uncomfortable. The human was not trying to defeat him. The human was waiting for him to reveal how. The moment Varkol moved, Caleb already knew something had changed. The warlord was no longer fighting for the audience. He was fighting for himself. The confidence that had filled the arena minutes earlier was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. Focus. The ancient armor around Varkol's body came alive, adjusting every movement with precision. The Karuan spectators watched in silence as their champion advanced. Caleb stayed still, not frozen, not afraid, waiting. Varkol noticed immediately. You still believe standing there will save you? He asked. Caleb looked at the armor covering the warlord's chest. No. Then why do you refuse to move? Caleb answered honestly. Because you keep showing me more than you realize. The warlord stopped. What does that mean? Caleb did not respond right away. He watched the armor, the small movements, the way the system compensated for every shift in weight, the way Varkol trusted the technology so completely that he had forgotten his own instincts. On Earth, engineers learned one simple rule early. The more complicated something became, the more places it had to fail. Varkol saw the silence as weakness. He stepped forward with a confident smile. You spend so much time thinking, human. That is your problem. Warriors act. Caleb looked up at him. Good warriors think before they act. The warlord moved again. This time, faster. The arena floor vibrated as the massive figure crossed the distance between them. Caleb shifted sideways, using the smallest movement possible. The crowd reacted with surprise as Varkol missed his target again. Not because Caleb was faster, because Caleb was already somewhere else before the attack began. The warlord turned sharply. How are you doing that? For the first time, his voice carried genuine frustration. Caleb answered quietly. You are fighting the way your armor expects you to fight. That sentence changed everything. The Karuan warriors in the stands looked at their leader. They had never heard anyone speak to Varkol like that. They had never seen anyone question the legendary armor that had protected him for decades. Varkol raised his arm, and the armor shifted into a new configuration. A hidden system activated. The ancient plates moved closer together, creating a stronger defensive layer around his body. The crowd cheered. They thought the human's advantage had disappeared. But Caleb noticed something else. The adjustment was slower than before. Only a fraction of a second. Almost impossible to see. Almost. You are adapting, Varkle said. I respect that. Caleb nodded. Thank you. The answer surprised him. There was no arrogance. No insult. Just respect. That made Varkle hesitate for a moment. Because Caleb was not trying to humiliate him. He was trying to survive. And somehow, that made the human more difficult to understand. The warlord lowered his voice. Your species hides behind diplomacy. You pretend to be peaceful because you are too weak to conquer. Caleb looked toward the thousands watching them. Peace is not weakness. He looked back at Varkle. Sometimes it is the hardest thing a species can choose. For a brief moment, nobody moved. Then Varkle made a decision. The rules of the challenge were no longer enough. His pride had been questioned in front of his entire empire. He reached toward the control panel built into his armor. The arena systems responded. The spectators immediately sensed something was different. The official trial was ending. Something else was beginning. Caleb saw the change. You are removing the limits. Varkle smiled beneath his helmet. Now you will see what I am without restrictions. The arena lights dimmed. Warning symbols appeared across the walls. The crowd stopped cheering. Even the Alien warriors looked uncertain. Caleb took a slow breath. He had wanted to understand the warlord. Now he finally would. Because Varkle had made the one mistake Caleb hoped he would not make. He had stopped hiding behind his reputation. And he was about to show the human exactly what he was capable of. The entire arena changed the moment Varkle removed the restrictions from his armor. The cheering stopped. The conversation stopped. Even the Alien warriors who had spent years praising their warlord became silent. They knew what that decision meant. The ancient combat systems inside the armor were no longer limited for a ceremonial challenge. Varkle had decided to show everyone why his name had become a legend across the galaxy. Caleb Morgan noticed the reaction immediately. He did not look at the armor. He looked at the people watching it. That told him everything. You did not need to do this, Caleb said. Varkle tilted his helmet slightly. Need? No. Human. I wanted to. His voice carried through the arena. For decades, I have allowed others to believe they understand my strength. Today, they will remember the truth. Caleb stood quietly. He understood something important. The most dangerous moments were not when someone was angry. They were when someone was certain. Varkle believed the outcome was already decided. That belief made him careless. The warlord stepped forward again, but this time the movement was different. The armor was faster, more responsive. Every system worked together perfectly. The crowd watched as Caleb moved backward, studying every change. He was not looking for a way to overpower Varkle. He was looking for the reason the armor needed so much power in the first place. You are still analyzing, Varkle said. Even now, Caleb nodded. Especially now. The warlord stopped for a moment. Why? Caleb looked at the massive figure in front of him. Because when people believe they cannot fail, they usually stop noticing how they can. That answer created another uneasy silence. Varkle had expected fear. He had expected desperation. Instead, Caleb continued treating him like a person with weaknesses. Not a monster. Not a legend. Just a person. The warlord moved with confidence, forcing Caleb to react. The human moved carefully, using timing and awareness instead of trying to match power with power. Every second revealed more. The armor was incredible. The technology was beyond anything most humans had ever seen. But it was also built around one assumption, that the person inside would always fight the same way. Caleb had spent his life learning the opposite lesson. Never become predictable. Never depend on one advantage. Never believe yesterday's solution would solve tomorrow's problem. Varkle noticed the change in the crowd. They were not watching him anymore. They were watching Caleb. That realization bothered him more than any challenge. You think you have discovered something, Varkle said. You think understanding my armor means understanding me. Caleb looked at him. No. I think your armor shows me something about you. The warlord waited. You built your entire identity around never being challenged. For the first time, Varkle did not answer immediately. The silence was brief, but everyone noticed it. Caleb saw it too. A small opening. A moment of doubt. But then the warlord raised his arm, and the armor began changing again. The symbols across his chest brightened. The arena systems reacted. The Karuan guards stepped back. They knew this was no longer a demonstration. Varkel's voice became colder. You wanted to understand me, human. He stepped forward. Then understand this. Caleb lowered his stance. The crowd held its breath. Because everyone finally realized the same thing at once. The human had not been trying to win the entire time. He had been waiting for Varkel to reveal everything. And now the warlord had shown him exactly what he needed to see. For the first time since the challenge began, Varkel the Iron Maw was uncertain. It lasted less than a second, but Caleb Morgan saw it. A tiny pause. A small hesitation hidden behind years of confidence. Most people would have missed it. Caleb did not. He had built his entire life around noticing the things others ignored. The arena remained silent as the warlord's armor continued changing around him. The ancient plates moved with perfect precision, creating a machine that looked impossible to overcome. But Caleb was no longer studying the armor. He was studying Varkel, the person inside it. You see weakness where there is none, Varkel said. His voice was calmer now, but the confidence sounded forced. Caleb shook his head. No. I see a person who has spent too long believing he cannot be challenged. The crowd reacted immediately. Some aliens whispered in disbelief. Others looked toward their warlord, waiting for him to answer. Varkel had defeated entire armies. He had stood before civilizations that surrendered simply because they knew his name. But this human was not impressed by the legend. Caleb looked at him the same way he would look at any problem. Carefully, patiently, honestly. That bothered Varkel more than an insult ever could. You think you understand me because you watch me move? The warlord asked. No, Caleb replied. I understand you because you keep showing me the same thing. Varkel stepped closer. And what is that? Caleb looked around the arena. He looked at the symbols of conquered worlds. The banners of the Karuan Empire. The thousands of spectators who believed power belonged only to those who could display it. Then he looked back at Varkel. You built everything around proving you are strong. You forgot to ask what happens when someone does not care about your reputation. The words landed harder than Varkel expected. Because deep down, he knew exactly what Caleb meant. The Karuan way was simple. The strongest led. The strongest decided. The strongest were respected. But Caleb came from a species that had survived without always being the strongest. Humans had learned to adapt because they had no choice. They had learned to build because they could not rely on nature. They had learned patience because rushing into every fight meant losing the people they were trying to protect. Varkel raised his arm, and the armor responded again. But this time, the movement was slower. Not because the machine failed, because the warlord hesitated. The crowd noticed. The Karuan noticed. Caleb noticed. Why are you not afraid? Varkel asked quietly. It was the first honest question he had asked all day. Caleb looked at him for a moment. Because I have been afraid before. That answer surprised everyone. Fear is not the problem, Caleb continued. The problem is letting fear decide what you do next. The arena became still. For a moment, Varkel saw something he had never expected to see in a human. Not anger. Not pride. Experience. The warlord had thought humans survived because they were desperate. Now he was beginning to understand they survived because they learned. Suddenly, alarms appeared across the arena walls. The combat system detected an abnormal power increase from Varkel's armor. The Karuan officials immediately began shouting. The challenge rules had been exceeded. The warlord had pushed the armor beyond the approved limits. Varkel ignored them. His attention remained fixed on Caleb. You wanted to know what I was without limits, he said. Now you will see. Caleb looked at the unstable readings appearing on the arena screens. Then he looked back at the warlord. He finally understood. This was not just about winning anymore. Varkel was willing to risk everything because losing to a human was something he could not accept. Caleb took a slow breath. The entire galaxy was watching, and now he had to decide whether he was going to defeat a warrior or save one from himself. The alarms continued to echo through the arena, warning every person watching that something had changed. The Karuan officials shouted from the control platforms, demanding that the challenge be stopped. The ancient rules existed for a reason. The armor system was never designed to be pushed this far during a public trial. But Varkel the Iron Maw ignored them. His eyes remained locked on Caleb Morgan. For the first time in his life, the warlord was not thinking about victory. He was thinking about the impossible. A human had looked past the armor, past the reputation, past the legend. And somehow, that was more unsettling than any opponent he had ever faced. You have one final chance, Varkle said. His voice was quieter now. Walk away, and the galaxy will remember you as someone who survived. Caleb looked at him. That is not why I am here. Then why? Caleb glanced at the crowd. Thousands of beings from countless worlds were watching. Many had arrived expecting to see a human broken by a warrior they considered unbeatable. Instead, they were witnessing something they did not understand. Because someone needs to remind you that strength is not about making everyone else feel small. The words stayed in the air. Varkle did not respond immediately. For a moment, he looked less like a conqueror and more like someone hearing a truth he had avoided for years. Then the armor surged again. The arena lights flickered. The system struggled to keep up. Caleb moved carefully, not trying to overpower the machine, but trying to reach the person controlling it. Every movement from Varkle showed the same pattern. The armor responded to his anger. It amplified his determination, but it also followed his emotions. And emotions were unpredictable. You think you can teach me? Varkle asked. Caleb shook his head. No, I think you can learn. That answer stopped him. Because it was not an insult. It was not a challenge. It was respect. Caleb stepped forward. You are not weak because you use armor. Everyone uses something. Technology, training, experience, the people around them. The problem begins when you believe the thing helping you is the thing that makes you valuable. The arena became completely silent. Even the Karuan warriors who had cheered for Varkle were listening. They had spent their entire lives believing the strongest person never needed help. But this human was saying something different. Real strength was knowing what you depended on without letting it control you. Varkle slowly looked at his own armor. The symbol of everything he had achieved. The reason others feared him. The thing he believed proved his worth. Then he looked back at Caleb. You really are different from the stories, he said. Caleb gave a small nod. So are you. The answer surprised him. Nobody had spoken to Varkle like that in years. Not as a monster. Not as a legend. As a person. Slowly, the warlord lowered his arm. The armor systems began returning to normal. The warning lights faded. The arena remained quiet until Varkle finally spoke. The challenge is over. A wave of disbelief moved through the crowd. The great Karuan warlord had ended the fight himself. But Caleb did not celebrate. He simply stood there, because he understood something important. Winning was easy to recognize. Growth was harder. Varkle walked closer, stopping in front of the human who had changed everything without trying to prove anything. Tell me something, Caleb Morgan. Why does your species hide this strength? Caleb thought about the question. Then he answered honestly. Because strength is not the hardest thing to control. He looked around the arena. It is what you do when you have it. Years later, the story of that day would spread across the galaxy. Some would remember the impossible moment when a small human stood before a legendary warrior. Others would remember the warlord who learned that pride could become a prison. But those who truly understood the lesson remembered something else. The universe was filled with beings trying to prove they were powerful. Humanity was different. Humanity had learned that the greatest strength was having the ability to cause fear and choosing not to. And from that day forward, whenever someone called humans small, the old warriors of the galaxy would simply smile. Because they remembered the day everyone learned that size was never the measure of a species. Character was.